Hello everyone and welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders Caffeinated. I am your host Belinda Brady and welcome to episode 8. And today's episode is titled The Kimberly Killer. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of this podcast, of this week's episode, first up, I need to talk about my sources for this episode, and my sources are as follows: thewest.com.au, trove.nla.gov.au, and dailymail.co.uk, Wikipedia, and Murderpedia. Okay, guys. Now, of course, the important stuff. What am I drinking? Well, we've now been plunged back into cold weather in my part of Australia. So I'm drinking another, of course, hot coffee, but I'm having it with French vanilla syrup, and it is beautiful, really lovely, really hitting the spot. And I hope whatever you're drinking is hitting the spot for you too. So without further ado, let's get straight into the episode ahead of us. And today's episode is titled The Kimberly Killer. And normally when we travel, it's usually a really exciting time. And if you're anything like me, it's also a little nerve-wracking. I mean, you've been saving for months, you've been planning for months, even longer. The day's finally here, you're going to go, and if you are like me, you tend to worry that you haven't got everything packed and have to check everything, 5, 10, 20 times. So, make sure that you have your passport, check. Got your airline tickets, check. Have your foreign currency, your money, check. Guns and ammo, no. And yes, that last part does sound really odd, especially when you are traveling internationally. But this is exactly what German tourist Joseph Schwab bought when he visited Australia in 1987, when he came to visit and he was staying in the Northern Territory. He bought guns and ammo, an insane amount of guns and ammo. And in 5 short days, Joseph shot dead 5 innocent people and plunged the state of WA, Western Australia and Northern Territory and the country of Australia into a world of fear, as no one knew who this killer was or when he was going to strike next, until it all came to a violent end via a shootout with police in the desert in Western Australia. So lend me your ears, guys, as we dive into the German tourist who terrorised outback Northern Territory and Western Australia, and who would be known as the top-end killer or the Kimberly Killer. But for this podcast, I will be using the term Kimberly Killer. Now, I will give you a warning. This does talk about murder, and it does talk about people being shot. So if that is upsetting for you, please, this isn't the podcast for you today. So, and if that is the case, I'm not offended. You do what you've got to do for yourself. You do not have to listen. But for those who do want to hear, and that's why we are here, grab your coffee, guys. Grab your drink. Grab whatever will get you through this podcast in a comfortable and relaxed and listening zone, and let's get it started. So let's go to the beginning, and I always like to start at the beginning. So put me on pause, get yourself sorted, get your drink sorted, come back to me, and I will see you in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Okay, guys, welcome back. I trust you have your beverages ready and you are ready to lend me your ears. So let's stop mucking around. Let's get right into it and start at the very beginning. Now, Joseph Thomas Schwab was born on the 25th of November 1960 in Starnberg, Germany, to parents Joseph and Joanna. And I'm hoping I'm saying his surname correctly. It could be Schwab or it could be Swab. I couldn't find any info on his parents apart from his mother was a seamstress and a housekeeper, but by all reports they were a very loving couple, very loving parents toward their shy and timid son. At the age of 15, Joseph joined a local rifle club in Pocking, which was a nearby town located in Lower Bavaria. a club and activity that Joseph was said to have thoroughly enjoyed in his teenage years. In June 1981, at age 21, Joseph came to Australia on a visa where he lived in the state of South Australia and was employed as a cabinet maker. Staying true to his love of weapons, he joined the local pistol club. He also bought a four-wheel drive, which is known as an SUV in the US, and he also bought several firearms and rifles and was said to frequently go feral pig shooting. Now, this in itself isn't unusual, and it's a practice that's done across Australia. Feral pigs are a menace to farmers and their crops and their livestock, as well as to humans, because they're vicious little things, well, big things, and shooting them to cull numbers was not uncommon. Now, Joseph was still relatively shy and quiet and kept to himself, but he didn't raise any eyebrows. None of his behaviour raised any eyebrows while he was in South Australia. Now, he returned to Germany in May 1984 and became a security guard and was trained using a pistol. He was still shy and polite, still kept to himself. He never married or had kids, and his intense interest in guns and ammo never wavered, which for him, his job as a security guard was the perfect fit. But the parts of his true character, the bad side, I guess, started to come out during his time in Germany, and he managed to get in trouble with the law over there before coming back to Australia. Now, they weren't massive red flags, but they weren't minor convictions. Say he had a conviction for forcibly entering a car on the passenger side while someone was driving, stealing from a restaurant, and breaking and entering. Still, that wasn't enough for him to be denied entry to Australia, and he landed back on our shores via Bangkok on April 18th, 1987. On the 22nd of April, he rented a Toyota 4Runner, which the US version was the Toyota Hilux Surf. So again, similar to an SUV, from Brisbane Airport, and stopped along the way to stock up on guns and ammo. Now, specifically, he bought a .223 caliber Ruger, Mini 14 semi-automatic, a .308 Seiko bolt action rifle, a .22 caliber bolt action rifle, a Winchester 12 gauge pump action shotgun, and around 3,000 rounds of ammo. Along with this rather large haul, he also bought camping gear and camouflage netting, with Joseph telling the store shop owner who he bought all this off he was going to hunt ducks and pigs and kangaroos. It is worth noting that the gun shop owner who sold Joseph this stash stated he seemed entirely normal when he was in the shop and talking to him. Joseph headed west and was in the vicinity of the Diamantina River, and if I've pronounced that wrong, I do apologise, which is a major river in the central west of Queensland. And it was in the Darwin, and he was in the Darwin area, which is the capital of Northern Territory, around the 20th of May. Now, his movements are sketchy, but he did get himself a parking ticket in Mount Isa, a Queensland suburb, not long after he arrived in Diamantina River, and at some point he crossed the Queensland border into the Northern Territory, and when he arrived in Darwin, he had repairs done to his rented vehicle and was spotted at Carmore Plains Station at Point Stewart on the 4th of June. He was also thought to have been shooting buffalo at around this time, as when everything came to a head, 10 sets of buffalo horns were found in his Toyota. At this time, when he was travelling around between Queensland and Northern Territory, he was still sending postcards back home to his family in Germany, and he sent 4 in total, and the last one he sent back to his mother, he said rather chillingly that he was, quote, "I am looking forward to something." Now, of course, his mother would never have known just what that something was. None of us would know until it was too late, until the whole thing just blew up. So, but his mother did say that in his postcards he sounded absolutely fine. Now, on the 8th of June, former Deputy Mayor of Fremantle, Marcus Bullen, who was really liked, really well respected, who was aged 70, his wife Winifred and their son Lance, aged 42, and his wife Joan, so Lance's wife Joan, all from Fremantle in Western Australia, were on a family holiday and had stopped to camp in Wayside, Northern Territory for the night before heading off again in the morning. Unbeknownst to them, Joseph was also in Wayside, with sightings of him at the Wayside Inn reported on the morning of June 9, which was the same morning Marcus and Lance had failed to return to the campsite after leaving to look for a fishing spot. So the boys had gone off to look for a fishing spot and they didn't return. So Winifred and Joan reported their husbands missing to the police. And that day, that afternoon, a search began to look for the missing men. The car that Marcus and Lance had driven to look for a fishing spot was found burnt out next to the Victoria River. Nearby, the police found 2 shallow graves that contained the bodies of Marcus and Lance. Both men had been shot in the back with a .22-3 rifle and they were naked. Police also found shoe prints at the scene, specifically a shoe that had a ripped sole in the soil near where their bodies were found, along with drag marks and blood. Police believed that the Mullins had been watched from afar or a height, and whoever was watching them then had waited for the father and son to get out of their car, and when they did, he or she ambushed them and ordered them at gunpoint to lie on their ground on their stomachs, where the killer then shot them in the back. After killing the men, the killer stripped them both, put their clothes in the car, stripped the car of its identifying license plates, pushed it away, but not too far away that it wasn't found, and set it on fire. Marcus and Lance had been buried in their shallow graves at the river's high water mark, so possibly in the hope that their bodies would be taken by the crocodiles who called the river and the area home. There are more saltwater crocodiles in the Northern Territory than anywhere else in the world, and they are the fiercer of the crocodile breed. We have freshwater and we have saltwater. And considering they measure on average up to 500 kilos, which is 1,102 pounds, and they can grow up to 4 to 5 meters long, it is a reputation they have rightly earned. It was very possible that one of these hungry ancient reptiles would have eaten the bodies buried by the river, but luckily for Marcus and Lance's grieving families, that didn't happen, and they were able to retrieve and lay to rest their loved ones who were killed in such a horrific way. But it was also essential, and it was also good luck because police were able to retrieve evidence from the bodies. But if that little sadistic twist to an already horrific crime didn't show police, who by this one murder were convinced they had an armed and dangerous lunatic on their hands and on the loose, then the next few days would blow any theories they had right out of the water. On June 13, 1987, Philip Walkermeyer, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. If I'm not, please let me know, who was aged 26, his fiancée Julie Warren, and their friend Terry Bolt were holidaying near Kununurra, Western Australia, the state next to Northern Territory, and some 9 hours or 550 kilometres, which is roughly around 280 miles away from where the Bullens had been murdered, and had set up camp at the Pentecost River, which is about 110 kilometres southwest of Kununurra. Now, the trio were joined by their friends David Mackenzie, who worked with Philip and Terry, at the Department of Aviation and another man by the name of Daniel Rowe. Now, the five of them fished until late in the night. They had a lovely night together and headed back to Kununurra the next morning after having breakfast together. Sadly, three of them would not be seen alive again. At around 4 p.m. on that same day, a truck driver hauling his truck along Gibb River Road saw smoke coming from the Pentecost picnic area. After he went over the crossing, he let a car that had been tailgating him pass him. Now, the truck driver took note of the car that had overtaken him. It was a white Toyota Hilux with Queensland issued number plates. The next day, a worried David Mackenzie returned to the Pentecost River picnic area looking for his friends. They had not arrived home, nor had they shown up for work, which was really out of character for both. He found their burnt-out car in a gully, and sadly he found Julie's naked body close by. She had a single shotgun wound in her back. He notified police, who arrived quickly on the scene, and they also very quickly found the bodies of Philip and Terry on a riverbank not too far from where Julie had been found. Philip had multiple .223 rounds fired through his right ear and chest, and Terry also had been shot multiple times, with .223 rounds having been shot through the right side of his head and one in the right shoulder and two in his back. All three had been stripped naked. Shoe impressions in the mud were found, and a quick link to the impressions left at the crime scene of the Mullins murder were made. Police figured that the killer had been stalking his victims from afar or from a height, just like what had happened with the Mullins, and then approached their campsite through the grass. He then opened fire, catching his prey completely unawares, moving in an arc around the campsite, so just circling them until all of his victims were dead. The top end of Australia, the Northern Territory and Western Australia, were plunged into fear, and locals were terrified of this mysterious killer who was killing people at random. The killings made international headlines, and the information on the vehicle suspected to be driven by the killer, thanks to the observant truck driver who was overtaken the day of the Kununurra killings, were circulated far and wide. Everyone was looking out for a white Toyota Hilux. Roadblocks were put in place throughout the Kimberley region and further south in the Pillara region. People were scared to travel on the deserted, isolated roads, which are all around the outback, and this left the roads virtually empty. The area was like a ghost town. A homicide investigation was quickly set up, and a tactical response unit, which consisted of 7 police officers, were flown to the Kununurra scene on June 16. They had no clue who or where their killer was, only the car he was thought to be driving, but out of nowhere, they got an unbelievably lucky break. On June 19, helicopter pilot Peter Lutengegger, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I'm so sorry if I'm not, was mustering horses for an upcoming annual rodeo when he noticed a vehicle matching the description of the most wanted car in Australia, partially hidden near Fitzroy Crossing in the Kimberley region, which is in Western Australia. He notified police, who conducted a search via air and saw that the car was like the one they were looking for, and that there was a makeshift campsite near it. They decided to check the car out on foot while police aircraft flew overhead. Now, the tactical response unit approached the scene carefully and saw Joseph standing on the roof bar, and the roof bar is just another word for tow bar, of his car, facing away from them, firing his .308 Seiko rifle at the police airplane that was circling him overhead. But he caught a glimpse of the approaching officers in his peripheral vision, turned around and started shooting, sending police scrambling for cover. Now, one of the officers on the scene, Bob Brown, who has now since retired, said at the time, quote, "He then pulled the gun up to his face and took a close look through the telescopic sight. That first shot was instinctive, but he had military training and was very accurate, which meant one of my colleagues was a split second from dying," end quote. Knowing a second of hesitation could cost a colleague their life, Officer Brown returned fire with his M16, blowing off Joseph's thumb and shattering the stock of his rifle. But undeterred by his injury, Joseph ran back to his car and emerged with his Ruger Mini 14 and started firing. The Tactical Response Unit responded to the heavy gunfire by throwing grenades to flush him out. But when the grass surrounding Joseph's campsite caught fire as a result of this, Joseph was able to disappear into the smoke. The fire spread to the thousands of rounds of ammo that Joseph had stashed under a bush, making them all go off at once, making them all explode at once, and turning the area into the scene straight out of a war zone. Police said it was like they were in a movie. They had never seen anything like it. Now, police said at one stage Joseph was attacking them using a technique called fire and movement, which was a classic military drill, and he was also running from side to side, hiding behind anthills as he shot at officers. Despite poor visibility from the smoke and gas, police continued firing at the still ducking and weaving Joseph, with a police bullet eventually hitting its target and striking Joseph through the back and exiting through his heart. He dropped in an instant and he landed face first in the dirt, which is quite ironic because that is what he did to his murder victims before him. His gun speared into the ground beside him. He was only wearing a pair of camouflage pants at the time of his death. The unknown killer that had terrorised the top end of Australia was dead, and police were certain he had plans to kill again due to the fact that he had an insane amount of ammo stashed on his campsite, and they were certain he was planning on striking the rodeo that was due to start a few days after this event and not too far from where he had set up camp. Forensic evidence, including ballistics, concluded that police had their man, and Joseph was the Kimberly Killer, the man who had ruthlessly killed Marcus and Lance Bullen, Philip Walker-Meyer, Julie Warren, and Terry Bolt. With the Kimberly Killer dead and identified, locals and police could breathe a sigh of relief, but they still had one unanswered question. Why? Why did Joseph do this? Police made inquiries with both in Australia and Germany to try and to find any clues as to why he did this, but they came up with nothing. There was nothing to indicate why he did what he did. Now, they did find a notebook back in Joseph's home in Germany, and it did note his hunting successes and the guns and ammo he planned on buying when he returned to Australia, but that was really not of any significance. Police drew the opinion at the time he had simply gone troppo, which is a term used to describe being mentally affected by a tropical climate. And Northern Territory and Western Australia has a tropical climate, and it is a dry heat. So, yeah, it could definitely affect a person. Whether it could affect them like that, I don't think so. And they, the police also thought that going troppo and the heat and the isolation of the Australian outback had just simply made him snap. 1 minute he was hunting buffalo, the next he was hunting humans and having shootouts with police. It just didn't make any sense. And the only person who knew why this happened was Joseph, and Joseph was dead. Joseph's remains were cremated and his ashes returned to his devastated parents in Germany, who were said to have not been able to comprehend what their son had done. They were devastated by their son's actions, and they are not alone in their grief. For an entire nation, police force and families of 5 innocent victims whose only mistake, if you even want to call it that, was simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were in the place where a psycho killer just happened to be, will never have an answer to that burning question of why. Why did he do it? Why did a seemingly quiet and timid and shy German tourist decide to start hunting and killing people and killed 5 innocent people? And that is a question we will never know the answer to. And there we have it, listeners. That was the story of Joseph Schwab, the quiet German tourist with a thing for hunting, who went from hunting animals to hunting and killing 5 innocent victims in the top end of Australia, and die in a movie-style shootout with the police in the desert. The man who will be forever known as the Kimberly Killer. And really, for his horrific actions, he deserves nothing more. He doesn't deserve to be known as anything more than that. So there we have it, guys. Another episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans done and dusted. And I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And thank you for lending me your ears. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. And if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it. Share it around. I would love it if you did. And same with this podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please share it. Let's share away, share the love. And as always, guys, thank you for listening. You are absolute rock stars. I really do appreciate it. And I believe you can comment on this podcast now. I have changed podcast host, so I do believe you can leave a comment on the host that you're listening. So if you're listening via Apple or Spotify, I believe you can comment. So if you feel the need to comment, that would be great. These episodes are now up on YouTube as well, so you can listen and comment on there. And I do have a website connected to the host, which is Podbean. I'm still working it around. I'm a bit of a novice with all this stuff. I'm not sure if there's a way you can contact me there, but I'm working on it. As always, guys, thank you so much for lending me your ears. You are all amazing. And until next time, guys, as always, stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated. I will catch you all later.